Speaking of stories, is there one you like to tell most of about Randy, your relationship with Randy?
Oh, I have a lot of Randy stories. Um, First time he came in, you know, he was definitely, he was the first Olympic level world class athlete that I ever had a chance to train with on a regular basis. And if you've not trained with somebody at that level, it's hard to describe, but it's just a different thing. And Randy was the reason why I took up weight training and I got in shape, and you can see kind of a difference. So there's the Jeet Kune Do 1 series where I'm kind of just natural genetics of what I was as a kind of a 240 pound heavyweight. And then the functional Jeet Kune Do 2 series where I'm more like 270 pounds, but I probably have, 8 or 9% body fat. That wasn't me being like, oh, I want to get in great shape to, to look cool or anything. That was survival. Because if I had not really spent that much time taking care of my body, I would have gotten broken when I trained with Randy on a regular basis. My first ACL surgery, I've had a couple ACL surgeries, both knees, but my first one was from a takedown of Randy. And it's not his fault. And I don't want to imply that he trains rough. It wasn't that Randy was a bad training partner. He's a great training partner. And it wasn't that he was training rough. He wasn't. But you can't work with an athlete at that level and give them game, give them a lot of game and not get hurt unless you take care of your body. This is very hard. So, or I mean, even if you're a great technician, what are you going to do? Give him like 3 or 4 minutes? I mean, he wanted to go in and work 5-minute rounds. So I had to get in shape. So that was the first thing. Second thing was, the first time he walked into my gym, told me who he was, and I'd seen his fight, and he was training Vitor. And in my mind, I was like, oh shit, Vitor Belfort, which this is kind of a funny story because at that time there was still this legitimate aura of badassery around Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. And that had come from Rickson. My introduction to Rickson. Rickson's like a Superman in terms of his performance. He really is a different level. And then we saw what Hoist did in the UFC. And so to me, I didn't know the difference because I wasn't down there in Los Angeles intermingling with the family politics. So to me, anybody that was a legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I think at the time even Vitor was using the Gracie name, I kind of put them in the league with Rickson. Well, he must have like this incredible game. And I think I might have been a blue belt, but I was a high blue or beginning purple at the time. So to me, I was immediately like, wow, Vitor Belfort, he's going to crush you on the ground. And we rolled, and I would catch Randy in submissions and things from the guard because he'd never done jiu-jitsu before. Now, I would sweep him, and he would immediately get back on top. That's one thing I realized. It was almost impossible for me to get on top of him. I could sweep him a little bit, but then he'd get back on top. And very rapidly, and this happens with wrestlers, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of the jiu-jitsu black belts didn't want to train wrestlers back in the day, very rapidly he learned how to counter what I was doing, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a triangle, an armbar. There's only so many times you're going to get him, and then, man, it becomes really hard because he knows not to put his hand there. He knows how to adjust his base. Mm-hmm. So, but because I was still competitive with him at the time there, I thought, man, Vitor's going to run him over. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I'm just blue-purple, and Vitor's Gracie's, the black belt. I had no idea that Carlson had just given him the name, and that technically Vitor was probably had a jiu-jitsu level that was probably equivalent to mine or maybe even worse at the time, But we trained for that, and all Randy really mostly did was train on the jiu-jitsu for that. And then the one thing we also worked was you got to watch out because the first few seconds he's going to come at you with a boxing blast, and if he catches you with that, Vitor was a southpaw, and if he catches you with that left cross and then runs forward, he can knock you out. We saw him do it to Tank Abbott and a few other people. So my solution for Randy was to hold his hand like this. Okay, so his elbow was going to be in front of his jaw. So there's no way just to leave it there, really, to leave his arm high, because if Vitor came in close enough to throw a body shot, Randy could use his greco. And that would make it pretty much impossible for Vitor just to run at him with the boxing blast. That's all we did. So Randy did this for stand-up, and then everything else was jiu-jitsu on the ground. And the rest is history. What everybody saw in the world at the time and what I saw, and I had not come to grips with at the time, was how masterful Randy was at the clinch, where the Gracies were black belts on the ground. Randy is a black belt at grappling standing up. And I had not experienced that yet because we didn't train clinch for that fight. He and I didn't train clinch. I mean, I wouldn't have been a good training partner other than a Muay Thai plum. I didn't really have much clinch. And he was worried about ground and stand up. He was not worried about Vitor's clinch, which we now know why. And what we saw there, I think, was the first time that the upright clinch, especially up against the cage, was used really effectively, where greco, which is, I think, the premium clinch art in the world, was used. And I think, and from my opinion, after that fight, what Randy showed the world in that fight was everybody needs greco. Everybody needs to train greco and an upright clinch. His fight after that was Maurice Smith, and that was a completely different thing. So with Maurice, he wasn't so much worried on the ground. He figured he could submit Maurice maybe, or at very least defend himself well. And he wasn't really worried in the clinch. He was worried about stand-up and getting inside. So for there, I used my boxing, and I would try and hit Randy, and he would take me down, which is kind of brutal. Fortunately, I had a boxing ring at the time, which was designed for professional wrestling, so it was very springy. I had bought it from professional wrestlers. But it was in preparation for that fight where I tore my ACL, and I realized if I'm going to train with these guys that are this level of athlete, I have to be an athlete myself. And so I kind of changed my body, quote unquote, just by really putting a lot of focus on strength and conditioning. Not strength for like how much weight I can lift, but it really was a question of survival. I want to be able to train with these guys, and for me to be able to train with these guys and not get hurt, I have to do this. So it forced me to do something I really didn't otherwise wouldn't have wanted to do. And yeah, those would be my two big lessons from him. I mean, I have lots of stories of him, but he's a very humble guy. He also made me realize how silly the street fighting idea was, and how dangerous professional athletes are, how dangerous somebody like him, who's a professional athlete who has jiu-jitsu and wrestling and some striking, how dangerous an MMA fighter can be. And, there's also a lot of lessons in terms of mindset, because Randy, I think, had a great mindset, which you could see when he would get into the cage and just kind of smile. He never showed any nerves or anxiety or fear. I know he felt those things at times, but you never saw it. He was always very calm. I think that was just part of his personality and the fact that he loves to compete, and he was somebody who should be in the cage because that's where he belonged. And part of that was the fact that he'd been wrestling all his life. So, from a very early age, whatever it was, he's used to competing in front of stadiums of friends and family. So, and that's a huge advantage when it comes to professional sports.